The press conference was chaos. Sterling Technologies stock had plummeted 40% in 3 days, all because of engagement rumors. CEO Victoria Sterling stood at the podium, her composure perfect but her eyes betraying desperation. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions about her broken engagement. Then she saw him, the janitor, cleaning the stage corner, invisible to everyone else. Without warning, she crossed the floor, grabbed his hand, and pulled him close. "Pretend to kiss me for 10 minutes, she whispered against his lips. "I'll handle everything else." The room went dead silent. Then their lips met, and the pretend kiss became something nobody could explain. Daniel Morrison had been cleaning office buildings for 3 years now, always taking the night shifts so he could be home when his daughter Lily woke up for school. Most people never noticed him, which was exactly how he preferred it. They didn't need to know that the man pushing the mop cart had once designed cutting-edge medical devices, or that his hands, now rough from industrial cleaners, had once sketched blueprints that could have saved thousands of lives. That life had ended 5 years ago, when his wife Catherine died, not from her illness, but from the stress of fighting a legal battle they couldn't win. A major pharmaceutical company had stolen his design, then destroyed him when he tried to fight back. They buried him in lawsuits, drained their savings, and Catherine's weakened heart couldn't take the strain. She died in his arms on a rainy Tuesday morning, making him promise one thing: live with kindness, Daniel. Even when the world isn't kind to you. He kept that promise every single day. He moved to a smaller apartment, took the janitor job at Sterling Technologies, and poured everything into raising Lily. She was 8 now, with her mother's curious eyes and gentle spirit. She didn't know her father had once been someone important. She didn't need to know. What mattered was that he was there every afternoon for homework, every evening for dinner, every night for bedtime stories. He taught her chess on an old wooden board, made her lunch with notes written on napkins, and never missed a school play, even if it meant switching shifts with coworkers who barely knew his name. Victoria Sterling was everything Daniel wasn't, or at least, that's what the world saw. At 32, she was the youngest CEO in the company's history, a woman who'd climbed from junior programmer to the executive suite in just 8 years. The media painted her as ice personified. Brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. They loved to photograph her in her glass office, 60 floors above the city, always alone, always working. What they didn't capture were the nights she stayed there until 3 in the morning, not because of deadlines, but because going home to an empty penthouse felt like drowning. They didn't see her reading her mother's last letter over and over again, the one that said, "If you can't love someone with your whole heart, don't love them for their convenience." Her engagement to Richard Blackwood had been exactly that convenient. He was heir to Blackwood Industries. Their marriage would have merged 2 tech empires, and everyone said they looked perfect together in photographs. But perfect was just another word for empty. And when she'd found him with his assistant 2 weeks ago, she'd felt more relief than pain. The problem was, Richard wasn't just any ex-fiancé. He was now her biggest competitor, and rumors of their breakup were destroying investor confidence. She needed to control the narrative. Needed something dramatic enough to shift attention. Needed someone completely unexpected. That's when she saw Daniel during the press conference preparation that morning. He was adjusting a microphone stand, careful and precise, invisible to her assistants who walked past him like he was furniture. But she noticed how he handled the equipment with an engineer's touch. Noticed the way he studied the acoustic setup with knowing eyes. She filed it away, not knowing that in 3 hours, desperation would make her remember this quiet man who seemed to understand things without speaking. When their eyes met across that chaotic ballroom, when she grabbed his hand and pulled him into that kiss, she expected him to pull away. Any normal person would have. Instead, he steadied her with gentle strength, playing the part she'd asked for with surprising grace. His hand found the small of her back, supporting her without possessing her. He kissed her like they'd done this 1,000 times before, like he understood the assignment was to sell an illusion. But somewhere around minute 3, when the cameras were still rolling and her heart was racing from more than just adrenaline, Victoria realized she'd forgotten she was pretending. The kiss that saved Sterling Technologies' stock price lasted exactly 10 minutes and 37 seconds. By the time Victoria finally pulled away, her lipstick smudged and her carefully styled hair slightly mussed, the narrative had completely changed. The broken engagement with Richard Blackwood was already old news. Every tech blog, financial newsletter, and gossip column had the same burning question. Who was the mysterious man who'd captured the Ice Queen's heart? Daniel had tried to disappear immediately after, returning to his supply cart as if nothing had happened. But Victoria's assistant, Hannah, had caught him in the service elevator, her tablet already showing the explosion of coverage online. "Miss Sterling needs to see you," she'd said. Not unkindly, but with the tone of someone who didn't expect to be refused. He thought about Lily, about the promise of invisibility he'd made to himself, about how complicated this could make everything. But he also thought about the desperation he'd seen in Victoria's eyes, the way she'd trembled against him despite her composed exterior. Against his better judgment, he'd followed Hannah to the executive floor. Victoria's office was exactly what he'd expected. Glass and chrome and spectacular views, but also what he hadn't. There were no personal photographs, no warmth, nothing that suggested a human being spent 12 hours a day here. She stood with her back to him, staring out at the city below, her reflection ghost-like in the window. "I need to be clear about something," she said without turning around. What happened downstairs was a calculated move. Our stock has already recovered 7%. By market close, we'll have gained back everything we lost this week. She finally faced him, and Daniel saw what the cameras never captured: exhaustion that makeup couldn't hide. A brittleness that suggested she might shatter if touched too roughly. "Richard Blackwood is attempting a hostile takeover. He's been planning it for months, probably before we even got engaged. The broken engagement was supposed to destabilize the company, make the board lose confidence in me. I needed something dramatic to counter the narrative." Daniel understood hostile takeovers. He understood what it felt like to have everything you'd built threatened by someone who smiled while they destroyed you. "Why me?" he asked simply. Victoria almost smiled at that. "Because you're invisible. No digital footprint I can find. No social media presence. No connections to anyone in my world. You're perfect precisely because you're nobody." She paused, seeming to realize how cruel that sounded. "I mean that you're nobody to them. The media, the investors. Richard, they can't use you against me because they can't find anything about you." She moved to her desk, pulling out a document that looked like a contract. "I need you to keep playing this role for 2 weeks. Just until the shareholders' meeting. We'll stage a few public appearances, nothing too demanding. I'll provide you with appropriate clothing. A cover story. Whatever you need. In exchange, I'll set up a full scholarship fund for your daughter. Elite schools from kindergarten through graduate school, all expenses paid." Daniel felt his chest tighten. She'd already researched him, already found his weakness. But when he looked at her, really looked at her, he didn't see a manipulator. He saw someone drowning who'd grabbed the first life preserver she could find. "You know about Lily. I know you're a single father. I know you work nights to be there for her during the day. I know you're doing everything alone." Her voice softened slightly. "I respect that. I'm not trying to manipulate you, Mr. Morrison. I'm offering a business arrangement that could benefit us both." He thought about Lily's school, where budget cuts had eliminated the art program she loved. He thought about the college fund he'd never be able to build on a janitor's salary. He thought about Catherine's voice telling him to be kind, even when the world wasn't. Sometimes kindness meant helping someone even when they could only see you as a convenient prop. 2 weeks, he said. "But I have conditions. I keep my job here. I don't miss any of Lily's school events. And she doesn't know about any of this." Victoria nodded quickly, relief flickering across her features. "Of course. Hannah will coordinate everything. Can you start tomorrow? There's a charity gala, and appearing together there would solidify the narrative." As Daniel left her office, he wondered what he'd just agreed to. He'd spent 3 years being invisible, and now he was about to be thrust into spotlight he'd never wanted. But something about Victoria Sterling's hidden fragility reminded him that everyone was fighting battles nobody else could see. Even ice queens, apparently, could crack. The transition from janitor to CEO's boyfriend required more than just expensive clothes, though the clothes certainly helped. Victoria's personal shopper arrived at Daniel's apartment the next morning with an entire wardrobe that probably cost more than his annual salary. Lily watched from the couch, eating cereal while cartoons played, as strangers transformed their living room into a temporary fitting area. "Are you going to a costume party, Daddy?" she asked, giggling when he emerged in a tailored suit that made him look like the executive he'd once been. "Something like that, sweetheart," he said, kneeling down to her level. "I'm helping a friend with something important, but it might mean some different schedules for a couple weeks. Mrs. Patterson next door will watch you a few extra evenings. Is that okay?" Lily studied him with those two wise eyes she'd inherited from her mother. "Is your friend nice?" Daniel thought about Victoria's desperate grip on his hand, her trembling masked as confidence. "She's trying to be." The charity gala was held at the Museum of Modern Art, a glittering affair where champagne cost more per glass than Daniel spent on groceries for a week. Victoria met him at the entrance, stunning in a midnight blue gown that made her look like she'd been poured from starlight. But her hand shook slightly when she took his arm. "Remember," she whispered, "we've been secretly dating for 3 months. You're a consultant from Seattle, helping with our new medical technology division. Keep the details vague." What struck Daniel most about the evening wasn't the opulence or the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes watching their every move. It was how naturally they fell into rhythm with each other. Victoria laughed at his dry observations about the pretentious art installations. He steadied her when her heels caught on the marble floor. When Richard Blackwood appeared, all sharp smile and calculating eyes, Daniel instinctively pulled Victoria closer, his hand protective on her waist. "So you're the mystery man," Richard said, his tone suggesting he didn't believe it for a second. "Funny how Victoria never mentioned you before." "Funny how she never mentioned a lot of things about you either," Daniel replied calmly, "though I'm starting to understand why." The flash of anger in Richard's eyes was worth whatever complications this might cause. Victoria's surprised laugh, genuine and unguarded, was worth even more. As they danced later, she whispered, "That was unexpected. The consultant from Seattle doesn't usually have claws. Even nice guys have limits," Daniel said, spinning her gently. "Besides, he seemed like the kind of person who deserved it." For a moment, Victoria's mask slipped entirely. He destroyed everything he touched and made it look like love. "I thought that was just how relationships worked." She caught herself, stiffening. "I'm sorry. That's not appropriate." But Daniel just adjusted his hold, keeping her close. "My wife used to say that real love makes you more yourself, not less. If someone makes you disappear, that's not love, that's theft." Victoria stared at him, something shifting in her expression. For the rest of the evening, her smiles seemed less calculated, her laughter less performed. When photographers asked them to pose, she leaned into him like she belonged there. By the time they left, even Daniel had almost forgotten they were pretending. Living at Victoria's penthouse was supposed to be part of the arrangement. "The paparazzi are watching," she'd explained. "It needs to look real." But nothing about her home felt real at first. It was all white marble and floor-to-ceiling windows, beautiful and cold as a museum. Daniel brought Lily over after school one day, when Victoria was at work, just to pick up some clothes he'd left there. But Lily, being Lily, immediately made herself at home. "Daddy, she doesn't have any pictures," Lily announced, scandalized by the bare walls. "Or books, or toys. Does anyone actually live here?" When Victoria came home early and found them there, Lily was drawing at the dining table while Daniel made grilled cheese sandwiches in the pristine kitchen that had probably never seen actual cooking. Victoria froze in the doorway, looking lost in her own home. "I'm sorry," Daniel started. But Lily had already bounced over to Victoria, holding up her drawing. "I made this for you. It's you and Daddy and me at the park. See? You're the one in the pretty blue dress. Daddy says blue is your favorite color." Victoria took the drawing with careful hands, studying it like it was a priceless artifact. "It's beautiful, Lily. Thank you." Her voice was soft, almost wondering. Would you like to stay for dinner?" That became their pattern. Daniel would cook simple meals, while Lily did homework at the counter. Victoria would arrive home to the smell of actual food, the sound of laughter, the warmth of life being lived in spaces meant for it. She helped Lily with her math homework, discovering she had a gift for making complex problems simple. Lily taught Victoria to play Crazy Eights and Go Fish, card games that had probably never been played in that penthouse before. One evening, while Lily was absorbed in a movie, Victoria found herself beside Daniel on the terrace, city lights sparkling below them. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly. "The pretending is easy. It's the real parts that confuse me." "What real parts?" Daniel asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. The way she unconsciously reached for his hand during meetings. The way she smiled now. Unguarded. And genuine. When Lily made her laugh. The way they moved around each other in the kitchen, with the comfortable choreography of people who belonged in the same space. "Catherine must have been extraordinary," Victoria said, instead of answering. "To inspire such loyalty, even after she's gone." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She was. But she also would have liked you. She had a thing about seeing through people's armor to who they really were underneath. She would have seen what Lily sees." "What does Lily see?" "Someone who needs to remember that it's okay to be happy. That success doesn't have to mean being alone." Victoria turned to look at him, and in the soft light, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "I'm going to hurt you," she said, like a confession. "I don't know how to not hurt people. It's all I've ever done." Daniel thought about all the ways he'd already been hurt, all the scar tissue that had formed around his heart. But he also thought about the way Victoria had started leaving sticky notes for Lily in her lunch bag, little encouragements and jokes. The way she'd hired his co-worker's son for an internship without mentioning it was her doing. The way she was slowly becoming someone she'd forgotten she could be. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe, you'll remember how to be yourself, instead of who everyone expects you to be." Before she could respond, Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Can we all watch the stars together? Mommy used to say they were angel lights." Victoria's breath caught. Lily had never called anyone but Catherine Mommy. But Victoria just opened her arms, and Lily climbed into her lap like she'd been doing it forever. They sat there, the three of them, watching the city lights that were the closest thing to stars they could see. Daniel pretended not to notice when Victoria wiped her eyes. She pretended not to notice when he reached over and took her hand. They were getting too good at pretending not to notice things that mattered. Everything shattered on a Thursday morning. Daniel was fixing a broken elevator sensor when his supervisor called him to the office. The television was on, showing Richard Blackwood at a press conference. "I think the public deserves to know the truth about Victoria Sterling's new boyfriend," Richard was saying, his smile sharp as glass. "Daniel Morrison isn't some consultant from Seattle. He's a janitor in her building. But more importantly, he's a man who was fired from Nexus Pharmaceuticals 5 years ago for stealing proprietary technology." The screen filled with old personnel files, legal documents, carefully edited to paint the picture Richard wanted. Daniel watched his past being weaponized, saw his wife's death reduced to a footnote about personal tragedies following professional disgrace. By the time Richard finished, Daniel had been transformed from invisible to infamous. Victoria was in a board meeting when the news broke. Daniel could see the exact moment she found out, watched through the glass walls as Hannah whispered urgently in her ear. Their eyes met across the office space, and he saw the war in her face, the desire to protect him battling against the need to protect her company. He knew which one would win, had to win. He didn't blame her for it. The board's decision was swift and unanimous. The relationship had to end immediately. Victoria had to publicly distance herself from him. The company couldn't afford another scandal, not with the shareholders meeting next week. Daniel was escorted from the building by security, his janitor's uniform and badge confiscated, his 3 years of quiet service erased in 3 minutes. Lily was at school when he got home. He sat in their small apartment, surrounded by the designer clothes Victoria had bought him, and laughed at the absurdity of it all. He'd known this would happen, had always known that stepping into the light would mean his past would find him. But for a few weeks, he'd let himself believe in the fairy tale. He'd let Lily believe in it. When he picked Lily up from school, she was crying. Sophie's mom said, "You're a thief." She said Miss Victoria fired you because you're bad. "Is that true, Daddy?" Daniel knelt down, holding his daughter's face gently. Sometimes people say things that aren't true because they don't understand the whole story. But you know what? It doesn't matter what they say. What matters is that I love you, and I will always be here for you. But what about Miss Victoria? She loves us too, right? She wouldn't believe bad things about you. Daniel thought about Victoria in that boardroom, surrounded by men in suits, demanding she choose between him and everything she'd built. Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups have to make choices that hurt, even when they don't want to. It doesn't mean they don't care. It just means the world is complicated. Lily wiped her nose, thinking hard. Like when Mommy had to go to heaven, even though she wanted to stay. Yes, Daniel said, his throat tight, exactly like that. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at their small kitchen table and wrote Victoria a letter. Not an email that could be hacked, not a text that could be screenshot, but a real letter on paper. He wrote about understanding her choice, about not harboring anger, about hoping she'd find someone who could stand in her light without casting shadows. He wrote about Lily missing her. He wrote about missing her too, though that wasn't part of their arrangement. He mailed it to her office, knowing she'd probably never see it, but needing to say goodbye properly. 3 days passed. Daniel found work at a different building, farther from home but with better pay. Lily stopped asking about Victoria, though she kept the designer backpack Victoria had bought her, running her fingers over it like a talisman. Life returned to its quiet rhythm, and Daniel tried to convince himself that was enough. Then Victoria called her second press conference. She stood at the podium in the same room where their story had begun, but this time she was alone. No assistants, no board members, just her and a stack of documents. "I have something to say," she began, her voice steady, but her hands gripping the podium. "And I need you all to listen very carefully, because I'm only going to say this once." She proceeded to systematically destroy Richard Blackwood. She had receipts, actual receipts, showing how Nexus Pharmaceuticals had stolen Daniel's designs. She had emails proving Richard had orchestrated the legal attack that destroyed Daniel's life. She had evidence that Richard's current company was built on technology Daniel had created. But more than that, she had recordings of Richard admitting to it all, bragging about it during what he'd thought was a private celebration of their engagement. "I've been complicit in a culture that destroys good people for profit," Victoria said, looking directly into the cameras. "I've stood by while men like Richard Blackwood crushed anyone who threatened their empires. But I'm done being complicit. Daniel Morrison is not a thief. He's an inventor whose work has saved thousands of lives, even if his name was erased from the patents. He's a father who gave up everything to protect his daughter from a world that had already taken her mother. He's a man who helped me when I needed it, without asking for anything in return except that his daughter's future be secured." She paused, and for the first time in her professional life, Victoria Sterling let her voice crack. "He's also the man I've fallen in love with, not as part of some arrangement, not as a business deal, but genuinely and completely. I'm probably too late to tell him that. I'm probably too damaged to deserve him, but I couldn't stand here and let his name be destroyed again, not when I have the power to stop it." The press conference erupted into chaos, but Victoria was already walking away. She'd just thrown a grenade into her own life, potentially destroyed her career, definitely made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in tech. But as she walked out of that building, she felt lighter than she had in years. The board tried to stop her, of course. They threatened to remove her as CEO, to sue her for damaging the company's reputation. But something unexpected happened. The stock price soared. Public opinion, fickle as always, had completely shifted. Victoria Sterling wasn't the Ice Queen anymore. She was the woman who'd chosen love over money, truth over power. Sales increased 40% in 3 days. The shareholders voted overwhelmingly to keep her as CEO. Richard Blackwood's empire crumbled within a week. Federal investigators, armed with Victoria's evidence, raided his offices. Patent lawsuits were refiled with Daniel as the plaintiff. The truth, buried for 5 years under legal threats and corporate power, finally came to light. It was raining when Victoria finally went to find Daniel. Not a gentle rain, but a downpour that soaked through her coat before she even reached his building. She stood outside Lily's school, waiting, watching other parents with their bright umbrellas and sensible rain boots. She probably looked ridiculous in her designer heels and ruined silk blouse, but she didn't care. She saw them before they saw her. Daniel was holding a broken umbrella over Lily, who was jumping in puddles despite his gentle protests. They were laughing, completely absorbed in each other, a perfect unit of two that didn't need anyone else. Victoria almost turned away then, almost convinced herself that they were better off without her complications. But then Lily looked up and saw her. "Miss Victoria!" Lily shrieked, running full speed through the puddles. She crashed into Victoria's legs, soaking her even more. "You came back! I knew you'd come back. Daddy said you had important things to do, but I knew you wouldn't forget us." Victoria knelt down in the rain, not caring about her ruined clothes or the parents staring at them. "I could never forget you, sweet girl. Either of you." Daniel approached slowly, the broken umbrella forgotten at his side. "Victoria," he said, and her name sounded like a question and an answer all at once. "I know I hurt you," she said, standing but keeping Lily's hand in hers. "I know I chose wrong at first. But I need you to know that it wasn't pretend for me. None of the real parts were pretend." Daniel studied her for a long moment. This woman who'd upended his carefully quiet life, who'd given his daughter a glimpse of family again only to disappear, who'd just destroyed her own world to rebuild his. "You didn't have to do what you did. The press conference. Richard. None of it." "Yes, I did," Victoria said simply. "Because that's what you do for people you love. You fight for them. You choose them. Even when it's scary. Even when it costs everything." Catherine knew that. She would have done the same for you. Something shifted in Daniel's expression at the mention of his wife. "She would have," he agreed. "She also would have told me I was an idiot if I let you walk away again. Does that mean you forgive me?" Daniel pulled her into his arms, rain streaming down both their faces. "There's nothing to forgive. You did what you had to do. So did I. But now we get to choose what happens next." "I choose you," Victoria said against his lips. "Both of you. If you'll have me. No contracts. No arrangements. No pretending. Just us." Lily tugged on both their coats. "Does this mean we can be a real family now? Like, with movie nights and Sunday pancakes and everything?" Daniel and Victoria looked at each other, then down at the little girl who'd somehow orchestrated all of this with her innocent wisdom and stubborn hope. "Yeah, sweetheart," Daniel said. "A real family." They kissed there in the rain, not for cameras or stock prices or anyone but themselves. It wasn't a 10-minute performance this time. It was just a kiss, simple and true. While Lily danced in puddles around them and complained that they were being gross. It was perfect. Victoria officially hired Daniel as Senior Vice President of Medical Technology Development. It wasn't charity. His designs, finally attributed correctly, had revolutionized 3 product lines. He worked regular hours now, dropping Lily at school each morning and picking her up each afternoon. Victoria learned to leave the office by 6, to cook simple meals badly but with enthusiasm, to read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. They moved into a new place, neither his apartment nor her penthouse, but something they chose together. It had a garden where Lily could play, a kitchen big enough for family dinners, walls that quickly filled with photographs and Lily's artwork. It was a home, not a showpiece. Together, they launched the Morrison Foundation, named for Catherine, providing free medical devices to families who couldn't afford them. The first recipient was a single mother whose daughter needed the exact device Daniel had designed all those years ago, the one that had been stolen and hidden behind corporate greed. Watching that little girl receive the help she needed, watching her mother cry with relief, Daniel felt something in his chest finally heal. "She would be proud," Victoria said quietly, her hand in his. "Of the foundation? Of you. Of how you never let them break your kindness. Of how you kept your promise to her even when it would have been easier to become bitter." Daniel thought about that promise, about choosing kindness even when the world wasn't kind. He looked at Victoria, who'd learned to choose love over fear, who'd become the mother Lily needed and the partner he'd never expected to find again. "She would have loved you," he said. "She would have loved how you fought for us." Richard Blackwood was convicted on multiple counts of corporate theft and fraud. His company was dissolved, its assets distributed to the inventors he'd stolen from over the years. Daniel received a settlement large enough to ensure Lily's future was secure, but he kept working anyway. He loved the work, loved creating things that helped people, loved coming home to Victoria and Lily, arguing about whether robots or dragons were cooler. The wedding was Lily's idea. She announced it over breakfast one morning, matter-of-factly stating that if they were a real family, they needed to have a real wedding. But not a fancy one, she declared. A fun one. With cake and dancing and maybe a bouncy castle. They compromised on the bouncy castle, but kept everything else Lily wanted. The ceremony was held in the garden of Lily's school, the place where Daniel had worked nights for 3 years, where he'd found solitude in simple work, where everything had somehow led to this moment. The guests were an eclectic mix, janitors and executives, Lily's classmates and board members, people from every part of their lives that had seemed so separate before. Victoria wore a simple white dress that Lily had helped pick out. Daniel wore the suit from their first fake date, now filled with real memories. Lily, the self-appointed ring-bearer and flower girl and officiant's assistant, wore a purple dress with sparkles that she declared was the most beautiful dress in the history of dresses. When it came time for the vows, Victoria surprised everyone by speaking first. "I used to think love was a business arrangement," she said, her voice carrying across the garden, "something you negotiated, with clear terms and exit strategies. Daniel taught me that real love is messier than that. It's burnt dinners and homework arguments, and dancing in the kitchen at midnight. It's choosing each other even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. It's finding someone who sees through all your armor to the person you forgot you could be." She turned to Lily then. "And it's discovering that family isn't just about blood or papers. It's about showing up every day, even when you don't know what you're doing, especially then. Lily, you taught me that. You and your dad saved me from a life that looked successful but felt empty. You gave me a reason to be brave." Daniel's vows were simpler but no less meaningful. 5 years ago, I made a promise to someone I loved to stay kind, even when the world wasn't kind to me. I thought that meant staying small, staying quiet, staying safe. Victoria, you showed me that kindness can also mean fighting for what matters. That love isn't just about protecting people from hurt, but about being brave enough to hope for happiness again. You brought light back into our lives when I'd forgotten to look for it." Lily insisted on adding her own vows, though nobody had expected it. She stood between them, holding both their hands, and spoke with the wisdom of someone who'd lost much but refused to stop believing in love. "I promise to teach you both all the new games I learn. I promise to eat vegetables sometimes, even though they're gross. I promise to help with chores without being asked more than 3 times. And I promise to love you both forever and ever, even when you're old and wrinkly and embarrassing." The crowd laughed. Victoria cried. Daniel lifted Lily onto his hip so she could be part of their first kiss as a married family. The photographer captured that moment the 3 of them connected, laughing and crying simultaneously, perfectly imperfect. As the reception began and Lily ran off to organize a kids versus adults dance battle, Daniel and Victoria stood together watching the sunset. "No regrets?" he asked. Victoria thought about her old life, the one with perfect surfaces and hollow victories. "None. You?" Daniel pulled her closer, thinking about the journey from that first desperate kiss to this moment. "Only one." "What's that? That kiss at the press conference?" "It didn't really last 10 minutes. More like 8.5. Victoria laughed, that genuine, unguarded sound that had become his favorite music. "Well then, Mr. Morrison, I guess we'll have to make up for those missing 90 seconds. "I guess we will, Mrs. Morrison." They kissed as the first stars appeared, as their daughter's laughter rang across the garden, as their friends and chosen family celebrated around them. It lasted much longer than 10 minutes this time, and nobody was pretending anymore. Some kisses change everything in an instant. Others, the ones that matter most, change everything slowly, gently, one real moment at a time. The Morrison family story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real, built on burnt dinners and board meetings, bedtime stories and breakthrough innovations, the courage to trust after loss and the wisdom to choose love over fear. It was proof that sometimes the most unexpected moments, the ones that start with desperate gestures and impossible requests, lead to exactly where you're supposed to be. Years later, when Lily was grown and telling the story to her own children, she would always emphasize the most important part. Grandpa was brave enough to be kind, and Grandma was brave enough to change. But the real magic? They were both brave enough to believe they deserved to be happy. That's the kind of love that lasts, not the perfect kind, but the brave kind. And in that garden where it all began and ended, and began again, where a janitor and a CEO had discovered that love doesn't care about titles or stock prices or carefully maintained facades, three hearts had become one family. Not because of a 10-minute kiss that shocked the world, but because of all the quiet minutes that came after, when the cameras were gone and life was just life, messy and difficult, and absolutely worth fighting for. The storm clouds gathered like an omen, swallowing the aircraft whole as thunder cracked through the cabin. The engines screamed their protest, metal groaning against nature's fury, while passengers gripped their armrests with white knuckles. Among them, a woman in designer clothes fought to maintain composure, her perfectly manicured nails digging into leather as fear etched itself across her face. Nearby, a man with weathered hands and military bearing shielded the elderly passenger beside him, his eyes cold and calculating even as chaos erupted. The plane plummeted toward the dark waters below, and then nothing but blackness and the roar of the ocean claiming its prize. She woke to sand in her mouth and waves lapping at her feet. The CEO's designer suit was torn, her blonde hair matted with salt and seaweed. Beside her, the man stirred, coughing up seawater as consciousness returned. They were alone on an endless stretch of beach, wreckage scattered like broken promises along the shore. She trembled, voice barely a whisper against the vast emptiness. "If we can't go back, must I marry you?" The question hung between them, absurd yet somehow prophetic, as if fate itself had already written their story in the sand. Marcus Hayes had spent 35 years learning how to survive. His body bore the map of that education's scars from Afghanistan, calloused hands from construction work, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of single fatherhood. The sun had baked his skin to bronze during countless hours on job sites, trying to make ends meet for his 7-year-old daughter Emma. She was everything now, had been since cancer took Sarah 3 years ago. The grief had aged him, carved lines around eyes that had seen too much death, but it had also sharpened his purpose. Every sunrise was for Emma. Every exhausted evening another day closer to giving her the life she deserved. Victoria Sterling inhabited a different universe entirely. At 30, she commanded boardrooms, with the same precision her mother had once commanded charity galas. Her blue eyes could freeze negotiations or close million-dollar deals, depending on what the quarterly reports demanded. The Sterling fortune had groomed her from birth private schools, Yale MBA, a corner office before she turned 28. Love had been a luxury she couldn't afford, especially after James had chosen her rival's bed and her father's biggest competitor as his new employer. Trust became a liability, vulnerability, a weakness she'd surgically removed from her emotional portfolio. They were oil and water, war and commerce, calluses and manicures. He knew how to read wind patterns and track animals. She could read market trends and track insider trading. His hands had held dying soldiers. Hers had held nothing heavier than platinum credit cards. Yet here they stood on this nameless shore, stripped of everything that had defined them, equal in their mortality. The island didn't care about her net worth or his purple heart. It only cared that they were soft, fragile humans who needed water within 3 days, or they'd die. Victoria's first instinct was denial wrapped in authority. She pulled out her waterlogged phone, shaking it as if corporate determination could resurrect dead circuits. "The Coast Guard will find us," she declared, her voice still carrying boardroom authority despite the chattering teeth. "My company has resources. They'll have helicopters searching within hours." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, He walked the beach's edge, reading signs she couldn't see: the height of the tide line, the direction of debris scatter, the complete absence of human footprints beyond their own. His trained eyes cataloged resources: bamboo clusters, coconut palms, a freshwater stream trickling from the jungle's edge. Finally, he turned back to where she stood, still clutching her useless phone like a talisman. "We need shelter before nightfall," he said simply. "Fire, water, food." In that order. Her laugh was bitter, edged with hysteria. "I'm sure someone will spot us before we need to play Robinson Crusoe." "Maybe," he conceded, already gathering driftwood. But hypothermia doesn't wait for rescue schedules. The first clash came when she tried to assert control, falling back on the only power structure she understood. "I've managed crisis situations before. I've overseen." "You've overseen nothing like this." His interruption was quiet but final. "Out here, there's no delegation, no assistance, no board to convince. There's just work and survival." She wanted to argue, to remind him that she'd negotiated with Fortune 500 CEOs, that she'd rebuilt her company's Asian division from scratch. But the words died as she watched him strip bark with his bare hands, creating tinder with practiced efficiency. Her designer heels sank into sand with every step, and when she stumbled, the sharp coral sliced through Italian leather and into her heel. The blood was bright against the white sand, real in a way her world never was. Marcus knelt beside her without hesitation, tearing strips from his shirt to bind the wound. His hands were gentle despite their roughness, and for the first time since the crash, she felt something other than fear or anger. It might have been gratitude. It might have been something else. "Thank you," she managed, the words foreign on her tongue. He just nodded and went back to building their shelter, leaving her to wonder when she'd last thanked anyone for anything that couldn't be invoiced. By the third day, Victoria had learned that nature didn't negotiate. The sun rose and set on its own schedule, indifferent to her internal clock still set to New York time. Marcus had constructed a lean-to from bamboo and palm fronds, engineering it with the same precision she'd once applied to spreadsheets. She watched him work, noting how he used vines as rope, how he angled the roof to shed rain, how he positioned the shelter to block wind but catch morning light. Her contribution that first day had been gathering firewood, though she'd needed 3 attempts to understand the difference between dry and merely dead wood. Her hands, soft from years of lotions and professional manicures, blistered within hours. She hid them at first, ashamed of her weakness, but Marcus noticed anyway. He showed her how to wrap them in torn fabric, how to grip with her palms instead of her fingers. The fire was their first shared victory. Marcus had fashioned a bow drill from bamboo and vine, but his hands shook from exhaustion after hours of trying. Without thinking, Victoria took over the steady pressure while he controlled the speed, and together they coaxed smoke, then ember, then finally flame from the friction. When the kindling caught, she actually laughed, not the polished laugh of cocktail parties, but something raw and genuine. "I haven't felt this accomplished since my first hostile takeover," she admitted, then caught herself, embarrassed by the comparison. But Marcus smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "Fire's more useful than paperwork out here." Their first meal was fish he'd speared in the shallows, cooked over their hard-won fire. It was barely edible, charred outside, raw inside, but she ate every bite. Hunger, she discovered, was the best seasoning she'd never wanted to taste. That night, the storm hit without warning. One moment the stars were clear. The next, rain hammered their shelter like bullets. The palm frond roof held for exactly 10 minutes before water poured through. Lightning turned the beach into a strobing nightmare, and Victoria found herself pressed against Marcus's back, shaking not from cold but from primal fear. "We're okay," he murmured, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I've weathered worse." She wanted to ask where, how, but thunder swallowed her questions. Instead, she focused on his breathing, using its rhythm to calm her racing heart. Dawn found them soaked but alive, and she realized she'd slept. Actually slept, feeling safer in this stranger's presence than she'd felt in her penthouse with its state-of-the-art security system. Trust, it turned out, wasn't about contracts or background checks. Sometimes it was just about someone staying steady while your world fell apart. The fourth night brought unexpected honesty. They sat feeding small sticks to their fire, the ocean providing nature's white noise. Victoria had spent the day failing to weave a basket, her fingers refusing to cooperate with Marcus's patient instructions. Frustration had nearly brought her to tears, not because of the basket, but because failure wasn't something she'd allowed herself in years. "Why are you so calm about all this?" she finally asked, gesturing at their primitive camp, their isolation, their uncertain future. Marcus stared into the flames for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memories he usually kept buried. Afghanistan. 2009. Our convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar. 3 days in hostile territory with 2 wounded, waiting for extraction that almost didn't come. He paused, adding another stick to the fire. After that, everything else is just an inconvenience. She absorbed this, trying to reconcile the quiet man beside her with that level of violence and survival. "How do you not let it break you?" "It did break me." The admission was quiet but unflinching. "Coming home to Emma, my daughter. That's what put me back together. Different shape, maybe, but functional." The mention of his daughter shifted something in his expression, softening the harsh lines. Victoria recognized the look. She'd seen it in mirrors when she thought about the life she'd never have time for. "Tell me about her," she said, surprising herself with genuine curiosity. His smile was immediate and transformative. 7 years old, going on 40. Reads everything she can get her hands on. Wants to be a marine biologist, or a princess, or both depending on the day. His voice caught slightly. Her mom died 3 years ago. Breast cancer. Emma doesn't remember much, which is both a blessing and a curse. Victoria felt the words pull something from deep in her chest. "I'm sorry." "Me too." He turned to look at her directly. "What about you? What breaks someone who seems unbreakable?" She almost deflected, almost retreated behind corporate speak and careful distances. But the firelight and isolation made honesty feel less dangerous. "I've never had anyone really see me. Not my parents, who saw an heir. Not James, who saw a stepping stone. Even I don't see me anymore, just the role I play." "I see you," Marcus said simply. The words hung between them, weighty with possibility. Victoria felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with their primitive circumstances. She'd been naked in boardrooms full of hostile investors and felt less seen than she did right now, in torn designer clothes, with dirty hair and broken nails. "That terrifies me," she admitted. "Good," he replied. "Terror keeps you honest." They sat in companionable silence after that, watching sparks rise toward stars that seemed impossibly bright without light pollution. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria wasn't planning the next quarter, the next acquisition, the next defensive strategy. She was just present, existing in the space between one breath and the next, between one heartbeat and its echo. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Food to find, water to collect, the endless work of survival. But tonight, she was learning that sometimes the most valuable thing you could possess was someone who saw through all your armor to the frightened, hopeful human underneath. The storm arrived on their 10th day like an angry god. Marcus had seen it building in the cloud formations, the way the birds fell silent, how the air pressure made his old injuries ache. He'd tried to reinforce their shelter, but bamboo and hope were poor defenses against nature's fury. It hit at midnight, winds that could have been hurricane force for all they knew. Their shelter exploded in the first gust, sending palm fronds whipping through the air like blades. Victoria screamed. He heard it even over the wind as debris struck her leg, opening a gash that immediately ran red. Marcus half carried, half dragged her to a cluster of rocks he'd noted days earlier, a small cave barely large enough for two. They pressed inside as rain turned the beach into a river, as waves climbed higher than seemed possible, reaching for them with foaming fingers. By morning, their camp was gone. Everything, the fire pit, their collected food, the rain catches he'd built scattered or destroyed. Victoria's leg was worse than he'd thought, the cut deep and already showing signs of infection in the tropical heat. She was burning with fever by noon, slipping in and out of consciousness, calling for people who weren't there. "James, don't. The contract isn't," she mumbled. Then clearer, "Mom, I'm trying to be perfect. I'm trying." Marcus felt helplessness creeping in, that familiar enemy from battlefield traumas. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and he wasn't going to lose another person he'd grown to what? Care for? The word felt inadequate for the fierce protectiveness surging through him. He'd seen plants the locals in Afghanistan used for wounds, and he'd noticed similar species here. It was a risk, but doing nothing was certain death. He left her in the shade with their last fresh water and plunged into the jungle he'd been avoiding. Machete-less and desperate. 3 hours of searching, cutting his hands on vines, tearing through undergrowth. Finally, he found what looked right: broad leaves with the same distinctive smell, bark that peeled in medicinal strips. He crushed them together with stones, making a primitive poultice that might save her, or might do nothing at all. She was worse when he returned, skin on fire, lips cracked despite the water he'd left. He cleaned the wound with seawater, she screamed, and fought him weakly, then applied the poultice, binding it with strips from what remained of his shirt. Then came the waiting. He held her through the night as she shivered and burned in cycles, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "Stay with me, Victoria. Emma needs to meet you. You need to tell her about board meetings and hostile takeovers. Make it sound like fairy tales. Stay with me." Dawn brought broken fever and clear eyes. She looked at him with such naked gratitude that it physically hurt, like staring directly into the sun. "You saved me," she whispered, voice raw. "We saved each other," he corrected. Because it was true, in more ways than she knew. Recovery was slow, intimate in ways that transcended physical proximity. He had to help her walk, bathe. Tasks that stripped away any remaining pretense between them. She learned his body's language, how his jaw tightened before tropical squalls, how his hands went still when he was thinking of Emma. He learned hers, how she hummed Chopin when anxious, how she still tried to check a wrist where no watch remained. 3 weeks in, she successfully speared her first fish. The triumph on her face was so pure, so utterly disconnected from her corporate victories, that he kissed her without thinking, just pressed his salt-chapped lips to hers in celebration of this small, perfect moment. She froze, then kissed him back, with an intensity that suggested she'd been waiting for this permission to be human, to want something that couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports. When they pulled apart, she laughed bright and startled. "If we weren't stranded, HR would have opinions about this. Good thing HR doesn't have jurisdiction here," he replied, tucking sandy hair behind her ear with fingers that had built shelter. Made fire. Saved her life. She caught his hand, examining the calluses and scars like they were precious texts. "These hands have done more real things than mine ever have." "Your hands are learning," he pointed out. "Look at them now." She did, seeing the cuts and calluses, the broken nails and sun damage. Hands that had worked. Truly worked, for the first time. "I don't recognize them." "I do," Marcus said quietly. "They're the hands of someone who survives." That night, she taught him about leveraged buyouts while they cleaned fish, making it sound like warrior's strategy. He taught her about reading stars for navigation, about finding true north when everything else was lost. They were teaching each other languages they'd never needed before, his of earth and endurance, hers of ambition and achievement. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd traveled the world for corporate retreats meant to build trust and teamwork, spending thousands on exercises and facilitators. Yet here, with nothing but need and time, she'd learned more about partnership than any consultant could have taught. "I was so angry at first," she admitted one evening, watching the sunset paint the ocean gold. "Angry at the crash, at being helpless. At you for being so capable when I wasn't. And now?" She considered. Really considered. "Now, I'm grateful. Not for the crash, but for what it's shown me. I was successful, but not alive. Profitable, but not present." Marcus understood. War had taught him similar lessons about what mattered when everything else was stripped away. But he'd had Emma to come home to, a reason to keep choosing life. Victoria had been slowly drowning in success, and it had taken a literal disaster to teach her to swim. The night everything changed started with Marcus deciding they needed a better water source. The small stream was getting brackish, too close to the ocean, and the spring he'd spotted up the cliff face promised cleaner, more reliable fresh water. Victoria wanted to come, insisted on it. But he'd seen how she still favored her injured leg. "I'll be back before dark," he promised, kissing her forehead in a gesture that had become routine, precious in its simplicity. The cliff was higher than it looked, the rocks more brittle. Halfway up, reaching for the next handhold, the ledge crumbled. He fell only 10 feet, but his ankle caught in a crevice, twisting until he felt the snap. The pain was immediate and nauseating, his vision going white at the edges. He was stuck, truly stuck, leg wedged at an angle that sent fire through his nervous system with every attempt to move. The sun tracked across the sky as he tried everything using his belt for leverage, chipping at rocks with his bare hands, but nothing worked. Then he heard her voice, carried on the wind. "Marcus! Marcus! Where are you?" "Here!" he shouted, voice hoarse. "The cliff! But don't!" She was already climbing. He could hear the scrabble of rocks. When her face appeared above him, dirt-streaked and determined, his first feeling was relief, immediately followed by terror. Your leg isn't healed enough." "Shut up," she said firmly, already assessing the situation with the same focus she'd once applied to hostile takeovers. "Tell me what to do." Together, they worked the problem. She found a strong branch for leverage, used the vines he'd taught her to braid for rope. When she had to put her full weight against his trapped leg to free it, the pain nearly made him black out. But her voice kept him conscious, a steady stream of encouragement, and surprisingly creative profanity. When he was finally free, she half carried him down, both of them slipping and sliding, leaving skin on rocks. On the beach, they collapsed, breathing hard, bodies trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. His ankle was certainly broken, already swelling purple-black. "You could have died climbing up there," he said, still processing that she'd risked everything for him. "You would have died if I hadn't," she replied simply. The pragmatic truth of it, delivered in her boardroom voice, made him laugh, despite the pain. Then she was kissing him, fierce and desperate, tasting of fear and relief, and something deeper than gratitude. "I love you," she said against his mouth, the words torn from some deep place. "I know it's insane. I know we're just trauma bonding or whatever psychological term applies. But I love you, and I almost lost you. And I need you to know." He pulled her closer with his good arm, this brilliant, broken, beautiful woman who'd learned to make fire and spearfish and climb cliffs for him. "I love you too, have since you tried to use your phone as a hammer that third day." She laughed, cried into his shoulder, and they stayed there as the sun set, two damaged people who'd found wholeness in the last place anyone would think to look for it. "If we die here," she said eventually, "at least we lived first." "We're not dying here," he promised, though his ankle throbbed a counterargument. "Emma needs to meet the woman who's going to teach her about hostile takeovers. And I need to meet the girl who's going to teach me about sea creatures," Victoria added, the future suddenly seeming possible again, even probable, even necessary. They built the signal fire at dawn, using every piece of dry wood they'd collected, adding green palm fronds for smoke. Victoria had become expert at maintaining flames, coaxing them higher while Marcus, immobilized by his broken ankle, directed the construction of a reflective backing from salvaged metal. The fishing vessel appeared on the horizon at noon, a dark speck that might have been anything. Victoria fed the fire frantically, adding more green fuel until the smoke column rose black and thick into the clear sky. She screamed herself hoarse, waved a makeshift flag of Marcus's torn shirt, ran back and forth on the beach like someone possessed. The boat changed course. Marcus watched her collapse in the sand, sobbing with relief, and thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful than her tears. They'd survived 43 days he'd kept count with notches on bamboo, and now the world was coming back to claim them. The fishermen were Colombian, working international waters, and spoke little English. But rescue needed no translation. They wrapped them in blankets that felt impossibly soft. gave them water that tasted wrong after weeks of filtered rainwater and coconut milk. The journey to civilization took 18 hours, during which Victoria didn't let go of Marcus's hand once, as if afraid he might disappear if she loosened her grip. The hospital in Panama City was a shock of white walls and machines, of forms to fill out and calls to make. Victoria's assistant cried on the phone, told her the whole company had been searching, that her memorial service was scheduled for next week. Marcus called his sister, who'd been raising Emma, and had to hang up when his daughter's voice asking Daddy made him sob too hard to speak. Then came the reckoning. Their rescue made international news. CEO and single father survived 6 weeks on deserted island. Photographers waited outside the hospital, wanting pictures of the romance everyone insisted on seeing. But when the discharge papers came, when real life beckoned with its obligations and social strata, they stood in the hospital lobby like strangers again. "I have a car coming," Victoria said, voice carefully neutral. "Back to New York." "Emma's in Boston," Marcus replied, equally careful. "My sister's place." They were oil and water again. Different worlds, different lives. The island had been parentheses, a pause in their real stories, wasn't it? "This is insane," Victoria finally said, but she was smiling through tears. "We have nothing in common, except almost dying." "We have everything in common that matters," Marcus countered, reaching for her hand. She took it, held it, studied their interlaced fingers, his dark and scarred, hers pale and healing. "Your daughter will hate me. I don't know anything about children. You'll learn. You learn to spearfish. Your world will bore me. My world will ground you. We'll fail." "We might," he agreed. "But we survived a plane crash and 6 weeks on an island. I like our odds." She kissed him then, in the middle of the hospital lobby, in front of the photographers and nurses and God, and everyone. It tasted like possibility. They went their separate ways that afternoon, but with plans to meet in 1 week. 7 days to return to their lives, and see if what they'd found was real or just island fever. 7 days to decide if love forged in extremity could survive normality. New York consumed Victoria immediately. The board wanted briefings, the media wanted statements, and her apartment felt like a museum of someone she used to be. Designer clothes that seemed absurd now, shoes worth more than Marcus probably made in a month. A bed so soft it felt like drowning. She sat in her first board meeting 3 days after rescue, watching executives argue about market share and fourth-quarter projections. Harold Steinberg was proposing another aggressive acquisition, the kind that would gut 200 jobs but boost stock prices. 6 weeks ago, she would have led the charge. "Victoria?" Harold prompted. "Your thoughts on the Chen Industries takeover?" She looked at their expectant faces, these soft people who'd never been hungry, never been afraid, never built anything with their actual hands. "I think we should explore partnership instead of acquisition. Keep their workforce, their corporate culture. Build something together, instead of consuming it." The room went silent. Harold's face darkened. "That's not the Sterling Industries way." "Maybe it should be," she replied calmly. After the meeting, her phone buzzed with texts from Marcus. Photos of Emma, holding a sign that said, "Welcome home, Daddy," in crayon. A video of them at the aquarium, Emma explaining to Marcus why octopi were the smartest creatures in the ocean. Another text. "She wants to know when she can meet the lady who helped Daddy come home." Victoria cried in her office, her corner office with its view of Manhattan, its testament to everything she'd achieved and everything that suddenly felt hollow. Boston was simpler. Marcus returned to his 2-bedroom apartment, to his construction job that his boss had held for him, to Emma who wouldn't let go of his leg for the first full day. His sister Maria had questions about the island, about survival, about the CEO whose picture was all over the news next to his. "She's not your type," Maria said carefully, watching him help Emma with homework. "I don't have a type anymore," he replied. "I have Victoria." Emma looked up from her math worksheet. "Is she pretty?" "Very." "Is she nice?" "She's learning to be." "Does she like fish?" Marcus laughed, remembering Victoria's first successful spear. "She's complicated about fish." Emma considered this seriously. "I want to meet her." 3 days into their week apart, Victoria called at midnight. I can't sleep in this bed. It's too soft. I put a blanket on the floor, but it's not the same. I know, he said, because he did. Emma asked why I was checking the wind patterns this morning. The board thinks I've lost my mind. I suggested we reduce executive bonuses to increase worker safety protocols. Maria thinks you're going to break my heart. I might, Victoria admitted. Not on purpose, but I don't know how to do this. Normal relationship things. Neither do I, Marcus reminded her. Sarah and I were high school sweethearts. I've never dated as an adult, especially not as a single father. We're a disaster waiting to happen. Probably. They stayed on the phone, not talking, just breathing together across 300 miles. Finally, Victoria spoke. I bought a ring. Marcus sat up. What? Not for you. For me. Made from salvaged aluminum from the plane. A reminder that I'm different now, that I want to stay different. But when I look at it, all I think about is you. Come to Boston, he said suddenly. Tomorrow. Meet Emma. See my actual life. It's Tuesday. I have meetings. She stopped, laughed. Who cares about meetings? Yes. Yes. I'll come. Victoria stood outside Marcus's apartment building, holding an octopus plushie and questioning every decision that had brought her here. The building was old, working class, with graffiti on the brick and a door that needed 3 tries to open. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, no elevator. Emma answered the door. 7 years old, with Marcus's dark eyes and a serious expression. She studied Victoria for a long moment, then announced, "You're wearing the wrong shoes for Boston." Victoria looked down at her designer flats. What shoes should I be wearing? Sneakers? Or boots? Something for walking. Daddy says you learn to walk on an island. But Boston has different rules. Emma. Marcus appeared behind his daughter. Let her in first. The apartment was small, clean, filled with Emma's artwork and photos of a woman who must have been Sarah. Victoria felt like an intruder, too polished, too much. But then Emma took her hand, pulled her to the kitchen table covered in science books. Daddy says you lived on an island. Did you see any cephalopods? What? Octopi, squids, cuttlefish, cephalopods. Oh, yes, actually. Small octopi in the tide pools. Emma's eyes widened. Really? What color? How many arms? Did you know they can change not just color but texture? For the next hour, Emma interrogated her about marine life, correcting her terminology, sharing facts with the intensity of someone 3 times her age. Marcus made dinner simple spaghetti, and Victoria realized this was his real life. Small apartment, bright daughter, making ends meet. I don't fit here, she said quietly while Emma was in the bathroom. You don't fit yet, Marcus corrected. Neither did I on your island. After dinner, Emma fell asleep against Victoria's shoulder while watching a documentary about coral reefs. Marcus carried her to bed, and Victoria watched from the doorway as he tucked her in, kissed her forehead, whispered something that made the little girl smile in her sleep. She likes you, he said, finding Victoria on his small balcony later. She likes that I've seen octopi. Same thing. He pulled her close, and she realized he smelled different here. Less salt, more city, but still fundamentally Marcus. This is who I am, Victoria. This apartment, this life, this daughter who needs stability and routine and someone who won't leave. I know, she said, though the weight of it terrified her. I need you to see who I am too. The real version, not the island version. So he came to New York the next day, bringing Emma, who'd insisted on missing school for this adventure. Victoria's penthouse made them both go quiet the space, the view, the casual wealth in every surface. This is bigger than our whole building, Emma whispered. Victoria knelt to Emma's level. But your home has something mine doesn't. What? Life, your drawings, your books, your dad's coffee mug collection. This place is just expensive emptiness. Emma considered this. You could get some drawings. I make good ones. The boardroom was harder. Victoria had to attend one crucial meeting, and Marcus witnessed her in full CEO mode, sharp, decisive, wielding power like a blade. She demolished Harold's proposals with precision, restructured a failing division in real time, reminded everyone why she was the youngest CEO in the company's history. Afterward, in the elevator, Marcus was quiet. "Too much?" Victoria asked, vulnerable despite her victory. "No," he said slowly. "Just seeing all of you. It's like watching you spear that first fish. Except the fish are corporations." Emma, who'd been coloring in the corner during the meeting, looked up. "Was it boring?" "It looked boring. Incredibly boring," Victoria agreed. And Marcus laughed. They spent the afternoon at the Museum of Natural History, Emma dragging them through the ocean exhibits, Victoria buying her every book she glanced at until Marcus intervened. They looked like a family, he realized, catching their reflection. Mismatched, complicated, but somehow fitting. That night, after Emma was asleep in Victoria's guest room, her first time in a bed that cost more than Marcus made in 3 months, they stood on the terrace. City lights spread below. "I'll sell the penthouse," Victoria said suddenly. "Move to Boston. I can run the company remotely or find something else." Marcus turned her to face him. "You don't give up who you are. We find a middle ground. Where's the middle ground between this and that?" "We'll build it," he said simply. "Like we built that shelter. Piece by piece." Victoria traced the scar on his hand from those first days. "You really think we can make this work? CEO and construction worker, penthouse and 3-story walk-up, boardrooms and bulldozers? I think we already did the impossible," Marcus replied. "We survived. Everything else is just details." 6 months later, Victoria stood in her redesigned office, the same corner space, but now with Emma's drawings framed alongside corporate awards, a photo from the island next to her MBA diploma. She'd restructured Sterling Industries, implementing what the business journals called radical humanistic capitalism, though she just called it common sense, learned the hard way. Marcus had started his own construction company with a loan she'd co-signed, building sustainable housing that he joked was disaster-resistant. Island-tested. Emma spent weekends with them in the Brooklyn brownstone they'd bought together. Not penthouse, not walk-up, but something in between. "There's a documentary crew," her assistant informed her. "They want to film your story. The island survival. The romance. The corporate transformation." Victoria considered, then shook her head. "Tell them no. Some stories aren't meant for cameras." That evening, they met at Emma's school science fair. She'd built a model ecosystem of a tropical island, complete with tide pools and sustainable shelter design. "My dad lived here," she explained to the judges, "and my future mom helped him survive." Future mom. Victoria felt the words like physical touch. She found Marcus in the crowd, held up her left hand where the salvaged aluminum ring had been joined by something more traditional, something that meant promises beyond survival. He smiled, that rare full smile that had first appeared by firelight, and mouthed, "If we can't go back." She mouthed back, "Must I marry you?" Emma won first place. They celebrated with pizza, the 3 of them laughing over Emma's detailed explanation of cephalopod intelligence. Marcus teasing Victoria about her continued inability to weave baskets. Victoria threatening to make them all attend a board meeting as punishment. Later, walking the Brooklyn streets with Emma between them, each holding one of her hands, Victoria thought about the question she'd asked on that first morning. Desperate, delirious, accidentally prophetic. "If we can't go back, must I marry you?" The answer, it turned out, was both simpler and more complex than survival. The answer was choosing to build something new from the wreckage of what was. The answer was Emma's hand in hers, Marcus's smile in the streetlight, the promise of ordinary mornings and extraordinary love. They returned to the island 1 year later, the 3 of them, a chartered boat, proper supplies, Emma bouncing with excitement to see where her father had lived, where Victoria had changed, where their family had truly begun. The shelter was gone, of course, reclaimed by wind and growth, But the fire pit remained. Stones they'd placed in a circle now worn smooth by weather. Emma ran the beach, collecting shells, pointing out tide pools, lecturing them about ecosystems with 7-year-old authority. "This is where you ask the question," Marcus said, standing at the spot where they'd first woken. "If we can't go back," Victoria began. "Must I marry you?" he finished. "And the answer was yes," she said. "Though it took us a while to figure that out." Marcus pulled out a small box, knelt in the sand where he'd once knelt to bandage her wounds. "So I'm asking officially now, with Emma as witness, with the island as testament. Victoria Sterling, will you marry me? Not because we can't go back, but because we choose to go forward." Emma squealed, jumped up and down, shouted, "Say yes!" With all the subtlety of childhood, Victoria looked at this man who'd taught her to make fire, to spearfish, to trust another human with her very survival. She thought of their messy, complicated, beautiful life board meetings and construction sites, penthouse views and school science fairs, designer suits, and work boots. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Though I should warn you, I still can't weave baskets. And I still can't read spreadsheets," Marcus replied, sliding the ring onto her finger, not salvaged aluminum this time, but something that sparkled with promise. Emma performed the ceremony right there, using the power invested in her by the ocean and a script she'd apparently prepared. They exchanged vows that mentioned quarterly reports and tide patterns, hostile takeovers and hurricane shelters, promising to love each other in both boardrooms and on beaches. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of hope, they sat by their old fire pit, Emma between them, and watched the stars emerge. The same stars that had witnessed their struggle, their survival, their surrender to something bigger than themselves. "Tell me the story again," Emma demanded, though she knew it by heart. "About the plane and the island, and falling in love." So they told it together, interrupting each other, arguing about details, laughing at memories that had once been desperate. How a CEO learned to gut fish, how a construction worker learned to navigate corporate politics, how two people from different worlds discovered that love was its own form of survival. The boat would return for them tomorrow, would carry them back to their complicated, imperfect, wonderful life. But tonight, they were just a family on a beach, under stars that didn't care about net worth or social status, telling stories by firelight, holding hands across the space where worlds collided, and love was born. "If we can't go back," Victoria thought, watching her daughter. She was her daughter now, in all ways that mattered draw patterns in the sand, while Marcus added driftwood to their commemorative fire. "We can only go forward, together, building something new from whatever wreckage we find. Creating shelter in the most unlikely places, discovering that sometimes the best adventures begin with a crash, and the most profound love stories start with a question, asked in delirium, that turns out to be the sanest thing ever said." The island held them one more night. This family forged in extremity, tempered by ordinary life, stronger for having been broken and rebuilt. Tomorrow would bring reality again, meetings and homework, deadlines and dance recitals, all the beautiful mundane chaos of a life actually lived. But tonight, they were timeless, eternal, complete. A CEO who'd learned to survive, a soldier who'd learned to trust, a child who'd gained a mother, and an island that had given them everything by taking everything away first. The fire crackled its ancient song, the waves whispered their eternal promise, and somewhere in the vast Pacific night, their story became legend, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. Love found in the last place anyone would look, built from nothing but need and trust, and the wild hope that some things, once survive together, create bonds that no amount of civilization can break. "If we can't go back, must I marry you?" "Yes, always, inevitably, impossibly, perfectly, yes."